I was a shadow to my parents and at school, but I showed ingenuity and started a business in the garage with friends. When I succeeded, I bought a Ferrari and— Hi Reddit, this is probably going to be a long one, but I really need to get this off my chest. I don't usually open up like this, but I'm feeling like I need to tell someone, and maybe getting it all out here will help. Fair warning, it's a lot, and some parts are, well, shocking, to say the least. Growing up was hell. I don't know any other way to put it. I was born into a family that never really wanted me. I wasn't like those kids you see on TV with doting parents and a loving home. My parents? They hated me. I'm talking pure, unadulterated resentment. I never figured out why, but from as early as I can remember, there was this constant cloud of anger hanging over them. They were always fighting, screaming at each other and at me, telling me I was a mistake. My mom would say things like, "If I hadn't had you, I'd still have a life," while my dad would just call me worthless over and over. We lived in this rundown shanty town on the edge of the city, in a tiny house with peeling paint, broken windows, and a roof that always leaked whenever it rained. The walls were thin, and there was always this musty smell, like dampness had seeped into the very bones of the house. It wasn't just our place, though. The whole area was like that. Houses that looked like they were barely holding together, families with their own sets of problems, and kids like me, just trying to survive. I didn't have much going for me back then. I didn't have the brains or the looks, but what I did have were my friends. They were like my escape from everything. 3 of them, Jake, Ryan, and Caleb. We found each other pretty early on, all from different types of messed up homes, but somehow, we fit. Maybe it was because we were all trying to escape something, even if we didn't talk about it outright. Jake was the smartest of us, even if he tried to play it down. His mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and his dad had bailed when he was a baby. Jake always had this drive, like he was determined to make something out of nothing. He came up with the ideas most of the time. Not always good ideas, but the ones that kept us busy. Ryan? He was quiet, but he was the toughest of us. His dad used to beat him, and he had scars on his back from where he'd been hit with a belt, but Ryan never cried. Not once. He was like this stone, taking everything in without ever showing pain. And then there was Caleb. Caleb was the joker, always making us laugh no matter how bad things got. He had this way of lightening the mood, even when we were standing knee-deep in garbage or getting into trouble. We started hanging out together more and more, mainly just to get away from home. We'd wander around the neighborhood, picking up sticks or messing around in the alleyways behind the crumbling houses. Eventually, we got into the habit of going to this old, abandoned lot down by the train tracks. It was hidden by overgrown bushes, and no one ever came down there, so it became our place. We called it the pit, and it was like our secret base. There were these old crates and broken furniture there that we turned into makeshift seats, and it became the place we went when we needed to escape. It was in the pit where Jake came up with the idea to start selling candy at school. It might sound lame, but for us, it was like this revolutionary idea. None of us had any money, not for anything extra anyway, but we figured if we could sell enough candy, we'd make a few bucks, maybe even enough to buy something for ourselves or just feel like we had some control. Jake's plan was pretty simple. We'd pool what little money we had, buy candy in bulk, and sell it to the kids at school for a markup. At first, it was just a few pieces here and there, nothing big. But as it turns out, kids at school loved candy. Word spread, and before we knew it, we were selling out by lunchtime every day. It wasn't long before we were making real money. Not a fortune, but more than we'd ever had before. And it felt amazing. For the first time, we weren't just the poor kids from the wrong side of town. We were running something. We had a purpose. But of course, things didn't stay that simple. They never do, right? It was around that time when things with Caleb started getting weird. He was the fun one, always joking around, but he started to pull away. He wasn't showing up to the pit as often, and when he did, he wasn't himself. He was quieter, more distracted, and he had this look in his eyes, like he was scared of something. We tried asking him what was up, but he just brushed it off, saying he was tired or that things at home were rough. But it was more than that. Something was wrong, and we all knew it. One day, we were at school during lunch, selling our usual stash of candy, when Caleb just snapped. He got into a fight with this kid, Jason, over something stupid. I think Jason was making fun of him for something, and before we knew it, Caleb had tackled him to the ground and was punching him over and over. The teachers had to pull him off, and Jason ended up in the nurse's office with a bloody nose. Caleb was suspended for a week, and after that, he barely came to school at all. It wasn't long after that when we found out what had been going on. Caleb's older brother, Dylan, had been in trouble with the law. We knew that. What we didn't know was that Dylan had been arrested for armed robbery and was looking at serious time in juvie. Caleb's family had fallen apart after that. His mom was always crying, his dad was drunk all the time, and Caleb had been caught in the middle of it. He was terrified of becoming like his brother, of being dragged down by the same stuff that had ruined Dylan's life. Then came the night everything really went to hell. We were all hanging out at the pit, just like any other day. Caleb hadn't shown up for a few days, but we weren't too worried. He had a habit of disappearing when things got rough at home. So, when we saw him walking up to the pit that night, we thought things were going back to normal. But Caleb wasn't alone. Dylan was with him. Dylan wasn't supposed to be out. He'd been released on bail, but he was supposed to stay at home, under house arrest, until his trial. So, seeing him there, in the pit, was a shock. And he looked rough. He had this wild look in his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days, and he kept pacing around, muttering to himself. Caleb looked nervous, too, like he didn't want to be there. Then Dylan pulled out a gun. None of us knew what to do. We just froze. Dylan was rambling about how he needed money, how he couldn't go to prison, how he wasn't going to let the system take him down. Caleb was trying to calm him down, telling him to put the gun away, but Dylan wasn't listening. He kept waving it around, pointing it at the ground, at the trees, at us. And then it happened. The gun went off. It wasn't aimed at anyone, but the sound was deafening, and we all jumped. Caleb lunged at his brother, trying to wrestle the gun away, but in the chaos, it went off again. This time, the bullet hit Caleb. He dropped to the ground, and Dylan just stood there, staring at his brother in shock. I remember screaming, or maybe it was Jake or Ryan, I don't know. Everything was a blur. Dylan took off running, disappearing into the night, leaving Caleb bleeding on the ground. We called for help, but by the time the paramedics got there, it was too late. Caleb was gone. Update. Hey Reddit, I'm back again. I've been sitting with everything that happened after Caleb's death for a while now, and I guess I need to get it all out. This is going to be another long one, so buckle up. After Caleb died, everything changed. It's like the world just stopped making sense for a while. We were all wrecked by it. Me, Jake, Ryan. Even though we didn't say it out loud, we all felt like we were responsible, somehow. Maybe if we'd done something differently that night. Maybe if we told someone about Dylan before things got so bad. But what's done is done, and there's no changing it now. The day of Caleb's funeral was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. Seeing him there, in that casket, just lying there like he was asleep, except I knew he wasn't waking up, it broke something inside me. His mom was a mess, and his dad didn't even show up. Not that it was a surprise, but it still felt like a slap in the face. After that, everything went downhill fast. Dylan disappeared. There were rumors that he'd skipped town, maybe gone down south, but no one really knew for sure. The cops were looking for him, but they didn't seem too eager to catch him. I guess in a place like ours, one more messed up kid on the run doesn't make much of a difference. Jake, Ryan, and I drifted apart after that. We didn't stop being friends, but it wasn't the same. The pit became this ghostly reminder of what had happened. None of us wanted to go back there, and so we didn't. We stopped selling candy at school too. It just didn't seem important anymore. It was like the fun had been sucked out of everything, and all that was left was this constant, suffocating feeling of guilt. For a while, I didn't know what to do with myself. I started spending more time alone, wandering around the shantytown like a ghost. My parents were the same as ever, angry, bitter, and distant. They didn't even notice that something had changed in me. But then again, I'm not sure they ever really saw me at all. But it was Jake who snapped me out of it. A few months after Caleb died, he came up to me one day and said we needed to do something. We couldn't just sit around and waste away like the rest of the people in our town. He was right, but I didn't know what we could possibly do. That's when Jake hit me with his plan. We were going to start a business. Not just any business, something big. He'd been doing research, reading up on entrepreneurs who came from nothing and built empires. He was obsessed with the idea of breaking out of the life we've been stuck in. At first, I thought he was crazy. How were we supposed to start a company with no money, no resources, and no experience? But Jake was nothing if not convincing, and after a while, I started to believe him. Ryan was on board too, and so the three of us started meeting up again, this time with a new purpose. The idea was simple at first. We were going to create a tech company. I know, sounds ridiculous, right? Three kids from a poor neighborhood with no education in business or tech, trying to start a tech company. But Jake had always been into computers. He taught himself how to code from some old library books, and before long, he was building basic websites and apps. Ryan had a way with people, and even though he was quiet, he knew how to get things done. Me? I didn't know what I brought to the table, but I was in. I had to be. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. The first few months were rough. We were working out of Jake's basement, using old, busted computers we'd scrounged from God knows where. We didn't have any real connections, but Jake somehow managed to get a few small gigs building websites for local businesses. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Things were going well, or as well as they could in the beginning. But then, just when it seemed like we were starting to get some traction, something happened that shook everything up again. Ryan had been working late one night, trying to close a deal with a small company downtown. Jake and I had gone home, but Ryan stayed behind to make sure everything was set for the next day. That's when the fire started. I got the call at 2 in the morning. Jake's house was burning. By the time I got there, it was too late. The fire had ripped through the whole basement, and everything we'd been working on was gone. Ryan was outside, covered in soot, coughing from the smoke, but alive. Jake, though, he was still inside. They said the fire started from an electrical short in one of the old computers we'd been using. The place was a death trap, and we'd known it. But none of us thought it would actually go up in flames like that. I remember standing there, watching the firefighters trying to put it out, feeling completely numb. All I could think was that we'd lost everything. Jake didn't make it out. They found him later, trapped under some fallen beams. He'd been trying to save the equipment, trying to save our company, but in the end, it cost him his life. After that, I didn't know if we could keep going. How do you move on from something like that? First Caleb, now Jake. It felt like the world was punishing us for trying to rise above our circumstances. Like no matter how hard we fought, we were destined to lose. Ryan was a wreck after the fire. He blamed himself for staying late, for being the reason Jake was even in the house when it went up. I tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, but I don't think he ever really believed me. He started drinking after that, and it wasn't long before he was spiraling out of control. One night, a few weeks after the fire, Ryan called me, drunk out of his mind. He was at the train tracks, the same place where we used to hang out when we were kids. He was talking about how it was all pointless, how we were cursed, how we'd never be anything more than broken kids from broken homes. I rushed over there as fast as I could, but by the time I got there, Ryan was gone. He'd walked right in front of a train. I didn't know how to process it. I still don't. In the span of a year, I'd lost my 3 best friends. The people who had kept me sane, who had given me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make something of ourselves. And now, I was the only one left. For a long time after that, I didn't do anything. I couldn't. I went through the motions, but I was dead inside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Caleb, Jake, Ryan, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed them. But life goes on, whether you want it to or not. And eventually, I realized that if I didn't do something, if I didn't try to honor what we'd started, then their deaths would be meaningless. So I picked myself up, as best as I could, and started over. I took what little money we had left, scraped together from the insurance payout after the fire, and poured it into rebuilding the company. I wasn't as good at coding as Jake had been, and I didn't have Ryan's knack for dealing with people, but I had their spirit pushing me forward. It wasn't easy. Hell, it was nearly impossible. But somehow, I managed to get a few more clients, and then a few more. Word started spreading, and before long, I was hiring people. Real employees, not just kids from the neighborhood. The company grew, slowly at first, but then faster. And the more it grew, the more I felt like I was doing something right. Like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely worthless after all. Now, here I am, years later. The company's doing well, better than I ever could have imagined. We're not some huge tech empire, but we're successful. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. And sometimes, when I sit in my office, looking out over the city, I think about how far we've come, how far I've come, but I never forget where it started. I never forget Caleb, Jake, and Ryan. Every decision I make, every step I take, I do it for them. Because if I don't, then what was the point of all the pain? What was the point of losing them? I still visit the pit sometimes, though it's changed a lot over the years. The train tracks are gone, replaced by a new development, and the old lot is now a parking garage. But in my mind, I can still see it. The overgrown bushes, the makeshift seats, the four of us sitting there, dreaming of a better future. It's funny in a way. We were just kids, selling candy at school, thinking we could take on the world. And now, I'm sitting here, trying to figure out if I ever really did. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. I didn't think I'd be back so soon, but things have been weighing on my mind, and I guess I just need to get it all out there. This part of my life is, well, it's wild. It's a mix of success, betrayal, and lessons learned the hard way. If the last chapter of my life was about surviving, this one is about trying to live. But as you'll see, it wasn't as smooth as I thought it would be. After rebuilding the company, things started to pick up. I was doing it all solo at first, trying to handle clients, development, and operations. It wasn't easy, but the grind felt good. It felt like I was pushing towards something real, something that honored the memory of my friends. Caleb, Jake, and Ryan were always on my mind. I didn't want to let them down. A couple of years went by, and the company started to gain a reputation in the local market. We were providing web development services, app development, and a few consulting gigs here and there. The hustle was real, but I was determined to make it work. That's when I met Aaron. Aaron was a sharp guy, an entrepreneur himself, and he had connections. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and get everyone's attention. We met at a networking event, and he approached me after my pitch, said he liked what I was doing, and thought there was potential to take it to the next level. I was skeptical at first. I'd built everything up to this point on my own, and I wasn't sure about bringing anyone else into the mix. But Aaron had ideas, big ideas. He talked about expanding, about bringing in investors, about scaling up beyond anything I had imagined. At the time, I was tired. Running a business by yourself is exhausting, and part of me was desperate for help. So, after a few more meetings and a lot of convincing, I agreed to let Aaron come on board as a partner. We set up a formal agreement, split ownership of the company, and suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. At first, things were great. Aaron brought in connections I never could have dreamed of. We started landing bigger clients, companies with deep pockets, and before I knew it, we were growing faster than I'd ever imagined. I started hiring more employees, developers, project managers, marketing specialists. For the first time, I felt like I was actually running a real company, not just scraping by. But with growth came new problems. One of the first major challenges was Allison, the head of operations Aaron brought in. She was efficient, no doubt, and she knew how to get things done. But she was ruthless, too. She pushed people hard, too hard, sometimes. There were rumors that she was cutting corners, taking shortcuts to meet deadlines. But I was so caught up in the excitement of the company's growth that I didn't pay enough attention. One day, one of our biggest clients, a tech startup called Verotech, came to us with a massive project. It was a full-scale app development contract, worth more than anything we'd ever taken on before. The timeline was tight, and the pressure was intense. Aaron was all in, promising the client we'd deliver, and Allison was right there, pushing the team to work overtime, to get it done no matter what. Things started to unravel when we hit a snag in development. Mark, one of our senior developers, came to me one night, stressed out of his mind. He said the codebase was a mess, that Allison had forced the team to rush through critical stages of development just to meet the deadlines Aaron had promised. He warned me that if we launched the app as it would be a disaster. I knew he was right, but Aaron kept brushing off my concerns. He insisted the client needed it on time, that we couldn't afford to miss the deadline, and that we'd fix any bugs in the updates later. Against my better judgment, I let Aaron convince me to push the project forward. And sure enough, when the app launched, it was a catastrophe. The app crashed within hours of going live, and Verotech was furious. They demanded refunds, and the project became a public relations nightmare. The fallout was huge. We lost not only the client, but also our reputation. Word spread fast in the industry, and suddenly, we were the company that couldn't deliver. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was what came next. I started digging into the finances, trying to figure out how we were going to survive the fallout from Verotech. That's when I found it. Discrepancies in the books, payments that didn't add up. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the deeper I looked, the worse it got. Aaron had been skimming money off the top for months. I confronted him, and at first, he denied it. But when I showed him the evidence, he didn't even try to fight it. He just looked at me and said, "This is business." I was furious, betrayed. After everything we'd been through, after everything I'd sacrificed, Aaron had been bleeding the company dry right under my nose. I knew I had to act fast. I cut ties with him immediately, bought out his share of the company at a significant personal cost, and tried to salvage what was left. But the damage had been done. The company was in shambles, and I was left to pick up the pieces once again. It was around this time that I met Sarah. She was a marketing consultant I'd hired to help rebuild the company's image after the Verotech disaster. Sarah was smart, driven, and she understood the industry in ways I hadn't even thought of. We clicked right away, and she became an invaluable part of the team. With her help, we started to turn things around. She helped rebrand the company, focusing on smaller, more manageable projects, and slowly but surely, we started to regain the trust of our clients. But things between Sarah and me didn't stay professional for long. We started spending more time together outside of work, grabbing drinks after long days at the office, and before I knew it, we were involved in a full-blown relationship. At first, it felt like the best thing that had ever happened to me. After everything I'd been through, Sarah was like this beacon of hope. But as things between us got more serious, the lines between our personal and professional lives started to blur. Sarah had a lot of ambition, and while I admired that, it also scared me. She started pushing for more control in the company, suggesting that we should bring on more investors, expand even faster than we already had. I tried to tell her that we needed to be careful, that we'd already been burned by growing too quickly once before, but she wouldn't listen. Things came to a head when Sarah brought in a potential investor named Daniel. Daniel was rich, connected, and charming. He seemed like the perfect fit to help take the company to the next level, but there was something about him that rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too slick, too perfect. Sarah was all for it, though. She kept telling me that Daniel was exactly what we needed, that we couldn't afford to pass up this opportunity. But I wasn't so sure. I started doing some digging into Daniel's background, and what I found shocked me. Daniel had a history of shady business dealings. He'd been involved in a number of failed ventures, and there were rumors that he'd left several companies in financial ruin after walking away with massive payouts. When I confronted Sarah about it, she brushed it off, saying that every successful businessman had skeletons in their closet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading down a dangerous path. Things between us got tense after that. We started arguing more, both about the business and our relationship. It felt like we were spiraling, but neither of us was willing to admit it. The final blow came when I discovered that Sarah had been meeting with Daniel behind my back, negotiating deals for the company without my knowledge. She was trying to cut me out, to take over the company entirely. When I confronted her, it turned into an all-out war. She accused me of holding the company back, of being too afraid to take risks. I accused her of betraying me, of trying to destroy everything I'd built. It was ugly. In the end, Sarah left, taking several of our top clients with her. She started her own competing company with Daniel, and for the second time in my life, I was left to pick up the pieces of a company that had been torn apart by betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. I couldn't be. I had been through too much, lost too many people, to give up now. I focused on what was left, the loyal team members who had stuck by me through it all, and we started over once again. It wasn't easy, but we rebuilt. I learned a lot during that time. I learned that success isn't just about the money or the clients or the growth. It's about trust. It's about the people you surround yourself with. And most of all, It's about knowing when to walk away from something or someone before it destroys you. These days, the company is smaller, but stronger. We're not trying to grow at a breakneck pace anymore. We're focused, deliberate, and careful. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control. Update. Hey Reddit, this is probably not what you were expecting. I know you're used to hearing from my friend, but this time, it's me, Adam, writing on his behalf. I wish I didn't have to be the one telling this part of the story, but life doesn't always go the way we plan, does it? I've been sitting on this for a while, wondering how to tell you all what happened. My friend, the one who's been sharing his journey with you, from the struggles of his childhood to building a business and overcoming betrayal, well, he's not here anymore. And I need to tell you what happened, because I think it's important. I think he would have wanted you to know how it all ended. We met a few years ago, back when his company was starting to turn around again. He'd gone through hell and back with his former partners, and he was more cautious than ever. But something about his energy drew me in. He was the kind of guy who never let the world crush him, no matter how many times it tried. I respected that, and we became fast friends. I wasn't involved in his business, not at first anyway. I had my own career in finance, doing decently for myself, but I always admired how he had built something from nothing. We'd hang out, grab drinks, and he'd tell me stories about everything that had happened. Some of the things he'd been through were hard to believe. Betrayal, losing his closest friends, and somehow still managing to keep his company alive. It was like something out of a movie. Eventually, I started helping him out with some business advice here and there. I had a knack for numbers, and while his company wasn't struggling anymore, he still had room to grow. We started working more closely together, and soon enough, I found myself a part of his world. His company began to skyrocket. With a more refined focus and the right strategies in place, he landed some major deals, working with big-name brands that would have been unthinkable a few years back. One of the most critical moments came when we partnered with Hotech, a fast-growing tech firm that needed custom software solutions. It was a massive contract, the kind that could make or break a company, and he nailed it. What really impressed me was how he never let the success change him. He always stayed grounded, always kept that same fire he had when he was rebuilding from the ashes. But as the money started pouring in, things started to shift. The company was growing faster than anyone expected, and with that growth came a lot of attention, some good, some bad. One of the most shocking moments happened about a year into our partnership with Hotech. We had just signed another big deal, this time with an international client, when we got word that Tom, one of our lead developers, had been poaching clients behind our backs. He'd been secretly developing software on the side for one of our competitors, using our resources, our time, and our people. It was a gut punch, especially for my friend, who had always prided himself on building a team he could trust. When we confronted Tom, he didn't even try to deny it. He just shrugged, said it was all part of the game. My friend was furious. He'd been through betrayal before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a business betrayal. This was personal. Tom had been with the company for years, and to find out that he'd been selling us out from the inside was almost too much for my friend to take. But as always, he handled it. He fired Tom on the spot and made sure he couldn't take any more clients with him. But the damage was done. It was a harsh reminder that no matter how much success you achieve, you can never fully escape the kind of people who will try to bring you down. That wasn't the only shocking event to hit us that year. Just as things were stabilizing after the Tom debacle, we got hit with a lawsuit from a former client, a high-profile tech company we'd worked with during the early stages of our comeback. They claimed that we had violated a contract, accusing us of delivering faulty software that had cost them millions in lost revenue. It was a complete shock. We knew the software had been solid, and there was no way we were at fault. But lawsuits like that? They're not about the truth. They're about power, and this company had a lot of it. They dragged us through the mud, taking us to court, trying to bleed us dry. My friend was stressed beyond belief. He'd been through tough times before, but this was different. He had a lot more to lose now. The company, the reputation, everything he'd built. In the end, we settled. It wasn't fair, and it definitely wasn't what we wanted. But the alternative was a long, drawn-out legal battle that could have sunk us. My friend was never the same after that. It was like he realized that no matter how hard you work, how much you try to do things right, There's always someone out there trying to tear you down. But we survived. And after the settlement, things got better. The company continued to grow, and before long, we were making more money than we ever thought possible. It was crazy. We went from barely scraping by to pulling in millions in revenue. My friend was finally living the life he dreamed of, or so I thought. That's when the sports car came into the picture. I'll never forget the day he bought it. He'd been talking about it for a while, how he'd always wanted a Ferrari, but he'd never actually gone through with it. He wasn't the kind of guy who flaunted his money. But one day, out of the blue, he called me and said he'd bought it. When I saw him pull up in that bright red Ferrari, grinning from ear to ear, I knew something had shifted in him. He was proud of that car, and honestly, he deserved it. After everything he'd been through, he deserved to enjoy his success. But looking back, I think that car was a sign that something deeper was going on. He was trying to fill a void, trying to prove to himself that he'd made it, that he'd escaped the life he'd been born into. He started living faster after that. More late nights, more parties, more reckless decisions. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd always brush me off, saying he was fine, that he was just enjoying life. But I could see it. He was burning out, trying to outrun the demons that had been chasing him for years. Then came the night of the crash. It was a celebration. We just closed our biggest deal yet, with a major international firm, and we were all riding high. We went out to celebrate, drinks flowing, everyone in good spirits. My friend was in rare form, laughing and joking, telling stories about the old days when he was just a kid selling candy at school. He left the party early, saying he wanted to take the Ferrari for a spin. I didn't think much of it at the time. He loved that car, and I figured he just wanted some time to himself after a long night. But then I got the call. He'd lost control of the car on a winding road just outside the city. They said he was speeding, going way too fast for the curve. The car flipped, skidded off the road, and crashed into a tree. By the time the paramedics got there, it was too late. He was gone. I still can't believe it. It feels unreal, like it's some kind of nightmare I can't wake up from. He was so full of life, so determined to overcome everything that had been thrown at him, and now he's just gone. The company, the success, the money, none of it means anything without him here. He was the heart of everything, the one who made it all possible. And now, I'm left to pick up the pieces. The funeral was small, just a few close friends and family. His parents showed up, which surprised me, considering how he'd talked about them. They were quiet, standing off to the side, looking like they didn't know how to process what had happened. I guess no parent expects to outlive their child, no matter what kind of relationship they had. After the funeral, I went back to the office, sat in his chair, and just stared at the empty desk. It's strange to think that someone who was so alive, so full of energy, can just be gone like that. I don't know what's going to happen with the company now. We've been doing well, but without him, it feels hollow. I'm not sure if I have the same drive he did, the same fire that kept him going all those years. But I'll try. I owe him that much. So yeah, that's where we're at now. It's not the ending any of us wanted, but it's the one we got. I wish I could tell you there was some grand lesson in all of this, but honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. If you've been following his story from the beginning, I guess this is the final chapter. He's not here to tell it himself, but I hope I did it justice. Take care, Reddit. Hug your friends. Hold them close. You never know when they'll be gone. That's it, I guess. Thanks for sticking with me through this. It wasn't easy to write, but I think he would have wanted his story to be told, even the end.